Out.
Step back.
Yeah.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I think there's a few folks still looking for seats, so if anyone has a free seat next to you, can you raise your hand? Make sure that folks, okay. For folks coming in, if you want to go to where one of the folks are. Wonderful. All righty, getting the last few folks in. Great to see a full room for this session. We are incredibly excited to be here today to share with you a little bit about some of the recent things we're doing with agents inside the GitHub platform. My name is Luke Hoban. I'm leading some of the engineering teams working on agentic coding inside GitHub, and I'm joined by my colleague Tim Rogers, who's leading product for these features. So today we're going to kind of give a bit of a background on where we've been with GitHub Copilot over the last 5 years, from completions to chat to agents. And then we'll do a really deep dive on some of the new work that we're doing inside GitHub with GitHub Copilot. I think folks probably saw that this morning in the keynote, Satya announced a really new feature, an exciting feature in the GitHub Copilot platform, which is GitHub Copilot Coding Agent. So Coding Agent is available now. It is our latest feature for agentic coding within the GitHub platform. GitHub Copilot Coding Agent is available in GitHub Copilot Pro Plus and Enterprise for anyone to use today. I'm going to do a raise your hands. Has anyone already tried it? A few folks. Oh, there we go. Great. OK. So lots of folks already trying it out. We'd love to see that. Today we're going to do a deep dive on what we've done with Coding Agent and the technology behind it. With GitHub Copilot Coding Agent, Copilot is now a member of your team. So you can bring it in and assign it issues. You can work with it collaboratively on PRs in your repo. And in many ways, it's bringing agentic coding to where you are, to a natural collaborative part of the GitHub fabric. I like to think of this as sort of one of the most natural and integrated ways that we're sort of bringing agents into information work across all of our different platforms in Microsoft today. And so we're really excited to show this to you today. So before we dive deep into Coding Agent, I wanted to give a little bit of a background on kind of the evolution of GitHub Copilot over the last 5 years. So I'm sure everyone here is familiar with GitHub Copilot Completions, which were the first feature that we launched as part of GitHub Copilot back 5 years ago. These really started the sort of modern wave of everything that we've done to bring AI into the developer experience. And when these started, they were at the scope of just a few lines of code, right? So you'd be typing and you get ghost text that was maybe the completion of that line or the next couple of lines. They were an interaction which sort of checked back with the user every less than a second, hundreds of milliseconds, very frequent check-ins, very small amount of net new work. And these were really focused on helping individual developers to be more productive within their IDE. So they were about one developer working on their machine, kind of being more productive every day. Last year, we introduced sort of the next big step, which was chat. And so chat gave us sort of the ability to not just take where I am in my context in my editor and give me the rest of that line, but sort of solve kind of problems for me. I could describe something I wanted, and it would suggest a set of changes. Initially, a set of changes in one file, and then over time, we expanded that to a set of changes that might happen across multiple files. This was still obviously focused on individual developers in the IDE. The thing that really changed over the last year, though, was sort of the improvements we've seen in models and in sort of agentic capabilities within those models. And so one measure of that is SWE-bench, which is a benchmark that sort of tests for real open source repositories. It takes some of the issues that were open in those repositories. It takes the real PR that some developer merged to fix that. And it goes and says, hey, can the AI recreate a PR which matches the tests for that PR perfectly? And so a year ago, when we launched chat, you'll see that SWE-bench verified this particular benchmark. The state of the art was 25%. So of all those issues in that benchmark, only 25% of them could the state-of-the-art AI models and agents solve. But now, where we're at today, we're over 70%. And we're continuing to see this grow every week. Every few weeks, we're seeing kind of this increase, both because of improvements in models and because of improvements in the agentic technology that we're building. And so this fundamentally changes the nature of the products that we can build, right? Instead of us being able to get a correct answer 25% of the time, we can get a correct answer 75% of the time. Now we can give you a lot more capability in the agentic tools that we provide. And so this brought us to VS Code Agent Mode. And so with agent mode inside VS Code and then also now in Visual Studio and our other IDEs that we support, we're really expanding the capabilities of what our agentic tooling can do to take on complete tasks. It's no longer just, give me some code. It's go solve a problem on my behalf. And now it's going to be the agent taking maybe minutes to go solve that on my behalf, to do a big piece of work while I'm sitting there watching it. Still very focused on the inner loop and still focused on VS Code. And so I'm sure everyone here is familiar with agent mode, but I'll just quickly go through it here. So, you can set the selector to agent inside VS Code chat. You can pick the model you want to work with. You can give it any task you'd like to solve. And VS Code will go off and work on this. And of course, it will work on it both by reading files and proposing some changes. But then most importantly, it'll also go and actually make those changes. So it'll go and edit the files in line. It'll go and run some tools like my npm run lint, my npm run test. It'll see the results of those tools. If they fail, it'll recognize that and figure out what to do to change its path and its trajectory on the work it's doing. And if they succeed, it'll move on and say, OK, I've completed the task you gave me. So this example just took 30, 40 seconds. But you can imagine this in many cases can take many minutes, or even in sometimes I'm sitting there working with it, iterating for tens of minutes on a problem with it. And this, of course, is what leads us to GitHub Copilot Coding Agent. So with Coding Agent, we're bringing that same kind of experience of agentic coding, but we're bringing it kind of into the outer loop. We're allowing it to work for longer periods of time, to take on even larger chunks of work, tasks that may be an entire GitHub issue, and tasks that may take up to tens of minutes for the agent to solve on my behalf. By pushing that into the outer loop, we're allowing it to be asynchronous and autonomous, to work on my behalf while I'm doing other things, and to help me solve problems that I can then come back to and review its work and iterate with it. And we're also bringing it now into GitHub. So instead of it just being something that lives as part of my individual developer productivity on my machine, we're bringing it into something that helps my team's productivity on GitHub and that I can collaborate with. But enough talking. Let's bring up Tim to walk us through a demo of this in action.
Thank you, Luke. Let's switch over. Great. Well, you should be able to see on the screen the website of our airline, Copilot Airways. You might have seen this at GitHub Universe, our conference last year. And it's also what you will have seen in some of the videos that Luke just showed. This is a moderately complex application. It's built in Next.js and uses Tailwind CSS as well. It's about 40,000 lines of code. So it's not like incredibly simple, but it's also not incredibly complex. So it's a nice kind of test case for these kind of agents. On this website, I can search for flights, I can make a booking, and I can even manage bookings. Now, obviously, this website, this app is going to be the next big thing. Like any project in my issue tracker on GitHub, I've got a bunch of work to do, of all kinds of different things. I've got new features I want to add, I've got bugs to fix, I've got refactors I want to do, the same stuff you've got in your issue tracker as well. Obviously, I could work through these things, but there's a lot here. So what if Copilot could jump in and help us? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a bunch of these issues from this list. I'm going to pick 3 as it happens. I'm going to click the Assign button, and then I'm going to pick Copilot. Or actually, I picked some that already are. So just so we can see it properly, I'll pick these 3, which are not assigned to Copilot. And then we can assign those. Ta-da. And there we go. So we're not even just limited to giving one issue to Copilot to work on in the background. We can give it 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever number we want to do. Right away, Copilot is going to give a quick reaction to those issues. So we've got the, interesting. Maybe it's because it's closed. Well, in general, we assign the issue to Copilot, and Copilot is going to react and open a draft PR, and then we can start working from there. So let's jump to this issue that I created a bit earlier on and assigned to Copilot. So this issue is a feature request. It's something we want to add to the app. So this is an airline. We've got a travel guide that suggests destinations that the traveler can go to, and we want to add user reviews to those destinations, which would be a really nice new feature that you'd see on a lot of travel websites. Now, the product manager for this work has actually written the description of what they want to do in Notion. That makes things a little bit hard for Copilot because it can't just, read data from GitHub. It's got to go somewhere else to get that. So let's see how it handles that. So this issue was assigned to Copilot earlier on, and Copilot opened up a pull request. So when we get started, Copilot opens a draft pull request, which it uses as the kind of canvas, the scratch pad for its work. And as Copilot works, it gradually updates the pull request's body and title to kind of update us on its progress. So when the pull request was first opened, we have this like, thanks for assigning the issue to me. Then as it works, it adds a plan like this, and then it starts to kind of tick off that plan and check items as it completes them. And then when it's done, we get a nice title that describes what the pull request is, and the kind of pull request body that you would love to see from the developers on your team that really like describes what's been implemented, how it's been done, and even seen some cases where it explains how to test it. So you get a really good PR title and PR body at the end. And as Copilot works, it progressively pushes commits, and you can see here it's actually broken up this work into a bunch of commits, which is, again, what you would want the ideal in your developer on your team to do, probably. And when it's done, it requests a review from you as the person that assigned the work, so you can jump in and you can give feedback. While Copilot's working, or at the end, we can click this nice new View Session button to understand what's going on under the hood. So in here, we get kind of Copilot's logs. We can see how it thinks and the different tools that the agent uses to explore the repository, understand the problem, that kind of stuff. And if you've used agent mode in your IDE, this will be very familiar, this idea of like a train of thought, like the consciousness of the model. So let's have a look at some of the stuff that it does. So in here, we can see Copilot like running bash commands to look through the repository and understand what's there. It looks at the code as it is right now. And it also tries to understand the problem that it's solving. So we saw when we looked at the issue that there was a link to Notion where a lot of the context was. And actually here, Copilot has been able to use the Notion MCP server to go and grab that information. So it can gather context and understand the problem. And then after it's kind of looked at the code and understood the problem, we then get this thought step, which is where Copilot kind of gathers its thoughts and fleshes out a plan of what it needs to do next. So this is kind of it saying, OK, here's what I've learned, and this is what I'm going to do next. Then moving forward, we start to see Copilot actually making changes. So we've got these create blocks here, where Copilot creates files, and these edit blocks where Copilot changes the existing files. So you can see as we scroll through these logs, we get a really good idea of how Copilot's approaching the problem, where it's looking to understand the current state, and then it makes changes to the state of the code. A really important step that we'll see a bit further down is where Copilot actually kind of begins to validate its work, which is going to be really crucial because we want to get a PR that's green at the end. So you can see here Copilot running bash, and particularly using npm run test. So this agent effectively has its own computer where it can run your tests, run your linter, and if it sees that things are good, then it can push and you can review. But if during this process it finds problems, so there are tests that are failing, or you've got lint rules that aren't passing, it can see those and fix them before it pushes. So rather than you getting a pull request that's read and having to say, hey, Copilot, can you fix this for me? It's immediately getting ahead of you and figuring out what to do next and getting a PR that's ready to go. This is actually a really nice example of the kind of asynchronous nature of this agent. So you can see here at the top that this session took 18 minutes for it to create this new feature. These sessions can obviously range a bunch in how long they take. At the bottom end, you see sessions that take like 2 or 3 minutes if it's a simple couple of lines change. And we currently have a time limit cap of 59 minutes. The reason we do that is because we've just seen that when the agent goes beyond a certain amount of time, it's very likely to be lost and confused. So we kind of limit that to not keep running if it's going to spend a bunch of actions minutes and use a bunch of LLM requests, but not actually produce a useful result at the end. So we've seen here these logs. Let's go back to the pull request now. So Copilot requested review from me, and I can jump into the Files Change tab, just like I would do with a human developer, to see what it's done. And scrolling through here, I can see that it's written code, it's updated tests. It's done a really thorough job here. This isn't a super simple PR. It's got 500 lines of changes. This isn't, a 1-minute piece of work or a 5-minute piece of work. It's a meaningful thing to build. And of course, we can choose what to do now. I, as a developer, can choose to check out this branch locally and work on it myself if I want to. So I can say, like, Copilot, you're done now. Like, I'm going to take this from here. Or I can actually use pull request reviews, just like, again, I would do with a human developer to ask Copilot to make changes. So if we just scroll down here a bit, like, maybe I can say here, we've got quite a lot of like JSX here. Maybe I can say like, can you refactor this part into a separate component? I just leave that comment for Copilot. And then just like when I assign the issue to Copilot, it's going to see that, jump in, and start working again. One more thing I want to show you before I kind of head out of the demo and back into some slides. One thing you might notice at the bottom here is that we've got this message that says 2 workflows awaiting approval. As we're building these agents at GitHub, we're thinking really carefully about how do we enable you to get this new productivity and this new functionality, but also at the same time, how do you maintain your security posture and the way you're working and the guardrails you have within your teams. And one of the ways that we've done that is by making sure that GitHub Actions workflows don't run before the code has been reviewed. That's really important because GitHub Actions workflows can have access to sensitive code or access to secrets and things like that. So you want to review that code and make sure it's safe before it goes into that environment. You might have seen this button before on an open source project. So if you've got an open source project and an outside contributor makes a PR to your project, you will get this same button. And effectively, we're treating the agent as a kind of semi-untrusted outside collaborator whose work you have to review before it gets run or gets anywhere dangerous. So that's the demo part. Let me switch back over to the slides now and we can talk through some more stuff. So let's recap. What we've seen here is that I can hand Copilot a task to work on in the background. Then Copilot opens up a draft pull request where I can see its progress and understand what it's doing. I can see that at a high level through the PR title and PR body and the commits. And I can also really zoom into that, looking at the logs to see in detail exactly what Copilot is doing. And then finally, Copilot requests a review from me. And I can check out that branch and work on it independently, or I can leave a review for Copilot and let Copilot pick up that work. In terms of how I give Copilot tasks, there are actually a bunch of different ways that I can do that. What I've shown you here in the demo so far is assigning an issue to Copilot on github.com. Well, there are actually other places where you can assign issues to Copilot as well. Just as a few examples, on the GitHub mobile app, you can assign an issue, and you can also do it through the GitHub CLI. Here's a quick video showing the kind of issue assignment process through the GitHub mobile app. So just like I can do on github.com, I can find an issue, I can open up the assignees menu, and I can pick Copilot. That's then going to follow exactly the same process that we've seen on github.com. So Copilot's going to open a draft pull request. I can go into that pull request, and I can watch from there, jump into the logs, and get pinged for review when it's done. This might seem like a kind of fun, cute thing, but I genuinely think this is really, really valuable. I've actually had situations in the last few weeks where I've spotted a bug or something I want to implement while I'm on the bus or making a coffee. I can quickly write an issue from my phone and assign it to Copilot. And then when I come back from my lunch break, I've got a PR that's ready for review. That's a real thing that I'm doing and other people in the team are doing. So it's cool to be able to do that. So that's the issues side of things. But you don't actually have to create a GitHub issue to be able to give work to this agent. We also have the ability to kind of assign it tasks ad hoc through Copilot Chat, which is really cool and also fits into developer workflows in an interesting way. So let's jump back to my laptop and we can see VS Code here. So while I'm writing code, I'm working on a task. I'm trying to build a feature, I'm trying to fix a bug, but at least for me as a developer, I'm often scrolling through code and I'll think oh, I can see another bug here, or we should refactor this, or this comment doesn't look right, or lots of things like that. When I see those things in my code, I kind of have 3 options. Option 1 is that I start working on that now and I get distracted from the task that I'm working on. Option number 2 is that I create an issue and put it in my backlog to be picked up later. And realistically, that will probably never get picked up and that thing will never get fixed. Or option number 3 is that I just forget about it. And realistically, option number 3 is the most likely thing to happen. But with Copilot Coding Agent, I've got another option, which is that I can stay focused on the thing that I'm doing, and I can ask Copilot to fix this thing that I've spotted in the background. So if we scroll down here, I've got this, and this is just the code for Copilot Airways, and we've got this part of the UI where it says, oh, I'm searching for the best flights. And again, we've got quite a heavy amount of JSX here, and it might be nice to refactor this into its own component. So I'm going to highlight that code, just going to make Copilot Chat a bit wider, and I'm going to ask Copilot, create a PR to refactor this into its own component. And just like I can do by creating an issue and assigning it to Copilot, I can just ad hoc ask Copilot to make a change here. It's going to open a pull request and follow that same process that we've already seen. So this is another really nice entry point for interacting with this agent. And you can see here, it's literally given me the URL of the pull request, and I'm going to get an email and notification when it's done, and I can jump back in. And that doesn't have to distract me in a meaningful way from the work that I'm doing. I can send that message quickly and move on and do something else. So that's how we can give work to Copilot. So how does this all work under the hood? If you asked a developer to work in your project, but didn't give them a computer and didn't give them their dev environment, that probably wouldn't end very well. They would write code that doesn't work, the tests don't pass, the linting steps all fail. And the same thing applies to an AI agent. If your AI agent doesn't have a development environment, it's not going to do a great job of solving problems. We use GitHub Actions as that development environment, which was a really natural choice for us at GitHub, given that's such a battle-tested, high-scale form of compute that developers are already using every day. This compute environment allows the agent to verify and validate its work as it does it without the long cycles of CI/CD. What I will add is that I still think CI/CD is really important. You want to have that canonical step that checks the code and makes sure that everything passes. And the agent isn't going to be able to run probably your entire test suite the same way as a human developer wouldn't run the entire test suite. But we can have this nice balance where Copilot runs the test and the linter for the code that matters or the code that it's changing, defer to GitHub Actions to review the rest. Why have we chosen GitHub Actions for compute? Well, it gives us this kind of safe, secure, and ephemeral environment that just can be spun up and torn down quickly for the agent, which is really, really nice. And the other nice thing about leaning on GitHub Actions is that you can customize the agent's development environment and do it in a way and using a language that you're already familiar with. So given the agent has Bash, it can run apt-get install, it can run npm install, it can run whatever you want. But if it has to do that every time it starts up working on your project, that takes a bunch of time, and it might make mistakes. So I can write a GitHub Actions workflow for my project that will set up the agent's state and get everything ready and pre-installed. So when the agent runs npm run test, everything's already there, the dependencies are ready to go, and it can get straight into the work that it's trying to do. So we've talked about how a developer needs a development environment. The other thing that developers need to be successful is context. If you just told a developer, do this thing, and didn't show them any of the code or any of the past issues or any other pull requests that have been worked on, that probably wouldn't end very well. And again, the same applies to our AI agents. The more we can give them the data and the context on the project and on the needs and on the requirements, the better job they're going to be able to do. So in the case of GitHub, you want to give them access to code, the issues, the pull requests, that kind of stuff. So out of the box, our agent has access to GitHub Code Search, which it uses to explore the repository and find the code that needs to be changed. So it can kind of, rather than CDing around the entire project and trying to find what to change, it can run a quick search and identify the right places right away. And we also have the GitHub MCP server enabled for the agent by default. And that also means that the agent can explore issues and pull requests and things like that. I've seen a bunch of real use cases of that in the past few weeks. So it's quite common in a GitHub issue to have this complex web of other issues that you link to. You say, this issue is related to this one, and then that issue is related to this one. Well, because of the MCP server, Copilot can actually follow all of those links and find all that context and understand the whole scope of the problem. Another really nice example that I've seen is Copilot finding other pull requests that are similar for inspiration. Again, the sort of thing you'd hope that a human developer would do. If you're trying to make a change, it's a great idea to find a similar change in the past, and Copilot can do that as well. But of course, not all the context that you need to be successful is necessarily going to live in GitHub. There are a bunch of other tools that teams are going to use, and it's really valuable to have those connected into the agent as well, so it can have access to the same data that a developer can have. And we're doing that using Model Context Protocol, or MCP, which you've already heard about, I'm sure, a bunch of times today, and you're going to hear about even more in the rest of the conference, I'm sure. MCP servers allow you to give the agent access to extra context and extra tools. At the moment, this is limited to local servers, but we'll be looking at support for remote servers in the future. Let me just give a few examples of how this actually works in practice. So in my demo, we saw using the Notion MCP server to go to a product requirements document that is stored in Notion. Another really nice example that we've seen is the Terraform MCP server, which can be used to supplement the agent's knowledge of Terraform. So the models that we're using for these agents were trained in the past. They don't have information right up to the current second, but the projects we work in, we might be working in a language like Ruby or a runtime like Node.js or a project like Terraform, and those projects are changing constantly. MCP servers can provide that kind of mainline to the current documentation, the current state, so that the agent can have the latest information, know exactly how that thing works right now, so it can make good decisions and implement what you want to implement. A third nice example is the Playwright MCP server, which can be used to give the agent the ability to browse the internet. That could be useful for following URLs that might be included in an issue description, or even testing an application once it's been built, making sure that it does the thing that it's meant to do. We care a lot about helping you to get these AI agents into your team to help you to be more productive, but we also want to do that safely, as I said earlier. So as we've been building Copilot Coding Agent, we've really designed it from the ground up to try to keep your data safe and ensure that your normal development processes are being followed safely and securely. There's a few examples of that on this slide. First off, Copilot only has read access to GitHub, so it can't, make changes that you're not expecting, with one exception, which is it has the ability to push to a specific branch that's been created for it. That means that we guarantee at a platform level that Copilot can't push changes to main or create releases or any of those kind of things. It's very limited and it's very scoped. We think read-only is generally going to be safe, but when there's writing, we want to be really, really controlled about that and make sure that it's only doing things that we approve. A second thing that we do is make sure the agent only has limited network access. That's important from a data exfiltration perspective. The agent could make a mistake and leak your code to the internet, for example, or a malicious user could give it a prompt that caused it to do something like that. We have limited internet access for the agent so that its internet access is limited to certain whitelisted locations. And of course, you have the ability to customize that. So if there are particular destinations that you want the agent to be able to use, you have the freedom to do that, but we start with a sensible firewall configuration that helps to keep you safe. Thirdly, as I showed you, we make sure that actions workflows don't run in response to the agent's pushes without your approval. And finally, we make sure that the person who gave Copilot a job to do can't then approve that code. That's really important because most teams have requirements that say that an independent person has to review every pull request. If I could come in and tell Copilot to do something and then review that, that would clearly undermine that requirement. So we've made it so that an independent person has to do that review. And again, we enforce that at the platform level, so you can't bypass. So that's a quick rundown of kind of seeing the agent and how it works. Let's talk a bit about how we've been using this at GitHub and what we've learned in the process. We've had GitHub Copilot Coding Agent in use within GitHub for about 2.5 months now. It's been used by about 400 people within the company in about 300 repos. We've actually merged almost 1,000 pull requests into the main branch that have been created by Copilot. And the reason I'm telling you this is as we're building these products, we really are testing them internally because we want to make sure that when we release something, it really works and it's actually genuinely valuable. If developers at GitHub didn't like this product, then probably you and your developers wouldn't like it either, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So that dog fooding process is really, really important to us. We've had an active Slack channel where we've been kind of working on this as a company with hundreds of messages a week, and we've been really trying to keep up the momentum internally with logs and videos and tips to get people excited and get people using this for real work. Of course, the first thing you want to do is start this testing close to home, and that's why we've actually been using Copilot Coding Agent to build Copilot Coding Agent, or Padawan as we used to call it. It turns out that actually Copilot is the number 5 contributor to our own project. So this is real evidence that this is something we're actually using to build this product. If it's good enough for us, we hope it's good enough for you. Let me just share a few examples. One that I really liked was adding a new feature where we wanted commits that Copilot makes to your project to be co-authored by the person that told it to do the work. Because that creates this kind of link where you can see where did this idea come from? Who is the human responsible for this work? We wrote a quick issue to describe that feature, assign it to Copilot, and it was able to surgically find the right files to edit and add the right test coverage, and we shipped that to production the same day, making the experience a lot better. We've also been using this a lot to pay down technical debt, which when you're working on a kind of fast-paced project to ship for build, you take on quite a lot of technical debt, unsurprisingly. So we've been using Copilot for things like removing feature flags, tidying up old code, and refactoring the stuff that we've already got. Copilot is therefore kind of taking care of work that otherwise might be or deprioritized. We can stay focused on kind of shipping new features and fixing bugs, and we can let Copilot take care of some of that other stuff in the background. So move fast and ship stuff, but also maintain hygiene and keep the technical debt manageable. But it isn't just our team. This has actually been used a lot across all of GitHub. A few examples that I like. So this is one I like from our billing platform team. They had a bug in their application where if the database was down or timing out or erroring out, it would completely fail. The application would just error, even if there was cache data available. Copilot was able to put together a relatively complex 400-line PR to fix that and make it resilient to database downtime. And they got approved that right away. There were no comments, no reviews. The first version was great. They shipped it, done. Another example that I really like is from our Copilot API team, who've been using this to manage configuration. We have this Copilot API project within GitHub, which is kind of the API that powers all of the Copilot experiences that you use. That has a lot of customers now, and they're constantly wanting to make changes to their configuration. changing their rate limits, changing the models they have access to, changing context windows. And that was taking meaningful amounts of time every day to update those configs. Now Copilot is doing most of that work, which frees up engineers to actually write code rather than update config files. I'm going to hand back to Luke now, who's going to talk through some tips and best practices that we've found as working on this and building with it.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I always love all those examples of the internal things we've done with it, and that's just a small sampling. As Tim mentioned, there's hundreds more of those that we've seen, and every day we're seeing these exciting examples of how folks are using this to actually improve their productivity and their team's productivity. So let me talk a little bit here about some of the tips for how we can sort of most effectively use Copilot inside our projects. So one of the things that I always think about, folks always ask, well, what kind of problems is Coding Agent good at, right? And it's a really hard question, right? Because it's sort of like, what kind of problems is a new hire on my team going to be good at, right? And it's not a simple answer to that. Everyone builds up an intuition over time about their code base and the person's skills and how they're going to fit. And I think one of the things that we like to think about here is imagine that you're onboarding someone to your team. What are the things you need to do to help make them productive within your project? And so there's a few things that sort of really apply with Coding Agent. The first thing is sort of giving really clear and well-scoped issues to Coding Agent. So the more details and the more context you provide in that issue, the more sure Coding Agent is going to be about the work it's doing. Oftentimes when we give work to other engineers on our team, we might be assuming a whole bunch of context that's out of band of that issue, right? That we've talked about this thing in the past and they happen to know that when I say these certain words, I actually mean something a lot more detailed. That isn't obviously going to be true with Coding Agent. It doesn't necessarily know those things unless you tell it. And so providing it the context, providing it links to related issues, providing it links to docs like the PRDs in Notion, these are all going to be even more important here than they might be for another developer on your team. Similarly, providing context with custom instructions. So if you've used VS Code Agent Mode, you may be familiar with Copilot instructions.md, which is a file where you can provide sort of instructions to Copilot that it should keep in mind every time it's operating within your repository. And this is just some markdown text that's going to be injected into every prompt that is run through Agent Mode. We support that as well in Coding Agent. And so this means that every time Coding Agent takes on a task, it will read in that file and include it in its context. So anything you want Copilot Coding Agent to know, you can just put in that markdown file. It'll know it every time it does its work. And the third is the dev environment. And Tim kind of talked about this. We're using Actions as that development environment. And so because we're using that development environment, it means that all of the stuff you do to configure your CI/CD environment to run your builds and your tests and all these things, you can bring all that information over and use it to set up Copilot's working environment. And so that means all that stuff you've done, pretty much every one of you who's using GitHub has written a bunch of YAML to set up your environment for your CI. Well, now you already have everything you need to get Copilot set up for its dev environment. And the very last step, Tim talked about MCP as well. This is such an important tool, and we've seen this, the reason you heard it so much in the keynotes today, you're going to keep hearing it going forward, is this has really enabled a huge ecosystem to very quickly appear around tons and tons and tons of tools that are available for these agents. And of course, the really important thing with an agent like Copilot Coding Agent is it's got a computer it can use, and it has a built-in sort of file editor and bash command. But the more tools you can give it, the richer, the more capable it's going to be, the more context it's going to be able to have. And so giving it access to all the tools it needs to be successful is one of the things you can do to really enable it to be even more powerful for you. So here's a quick video of some of this in action. So we'll start with kind of an issue that was opened here. And notice in this case, the issue is really fleshed out with a lot of detail. Right? We're giving it kind of what are all the steps we want it to take, what does the implementation look like, what does success look like. The more detail we give it, the more success it can have. We also here add a fairly detailed Copilot instructions.md, right? We talk about the style guidelines we want it to fulfill. We give it an upfront understanding of the base structure. We give it all the information that a developer might need to be productive in this environment. And then we give it some Copilot setup steps. So a little bit of YAML to describe what version of Node we want and to run npm CI before it gets started. So the environment is set up and ready to go for a productive developer right away. And here you can see, you can even go and look at the raw actions logs of what happened behind the scenes when Copilot was running, and you can see what it did. And then finally, in our repository level Copilot coding agent settings, you see we configure our MCP servers just like we would within VS Code, configure with an MCP JSON file. We can bring that file over and configure it for our repository. An enormous number of tools that we have available to give Copilot much richer capabilities within the platform. All right. So I'll just recap on a few of the sort of core things we saw here. The first thing really is we're taking kind of agentic coding from being a pair programmer sitting kind of beside you on your developer machine, helping you to be productive as an individual, to making this really a peer programmer, a member of your team, someone you can assign work to and collaborate with as part of the work that you do. We're bringing the metaphor of assigning issues and giving it sort of a first-class meaning within the platform, letting Copilot become that member of your team that collaborates on your terms with inside issues, inside pull requests. You can iterate with it, give comments, very natural interaction model. Copilot Coding Agent sits on top of all the foundations we have inside GitHub. It sits on top of issues and pull requests and actions and Copilot. All these pieces that we have that you're familiar with and use every day, now you can use along with Agent. And most importantly, we're just getting started. One of the things I often sort of tell folks on the team is the amazing thing about this is that we're clearly just 1% of where we can be in terms of the impact that this can have over time. And it's going to be amazing to see what we can build on top of this as we go. So there you go. You can assign issues to Copilot, your newest team member. Thank you. All right, so we have some time for Q&A if anyone has them. I think there's a mic around, so if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to get the mic over to you. Actually, don't know where the mic is, so if folks yell out, I'll replay back the question before we move on. There's one over here.
Will this be available for GitHub Enterprise on-prem?
The question was, will this be available for GitHub Enterprise on-prem?
At the moment, the answer to no. We don't have any plans to bring these kind of like, I guess, GitHub.com integrated experiences for GitHub Enterprise Server, but never say never, I think is the answer. But at the moment, we don't have any plans to do that.
All right, we have a mic set up in the middle if anyone wants to use that. There we go. So the question was, can an agent cross repos? So today we do limit it to a single repository. So we saw things like the ability for it to assign an issue and then open a pull request that will always today be in the same repository. And also by default, when we give it access to the GitHub MCP server, we give it an access token that only has access to read-only within the same repository. This is because today, kind of a lot of GitHub's access controls are obviously defined at the repo boundary, right? That's a natural sort of container unit for access control. We know that for a lot of organizations, in fact, this is even more true internally inside GitHub, we really have highly dependent sort of cross-repository working things where issues in one repository are frequently solved within another one. And so we know this is something we want to do, to open it up to be able to work across repositories and for you to be able to delegate access to, if I'm working on an issue in this repository, you should have access to these other repositories for opening pull requests. But for right now, it is limited to one repository. With the ability to, Tim showed the ability to sort of kick off a task where you don't have to assign the issue. You can just sort of, say at GitHub, open a PR. That would allow you then to go sort of open a PR in another repository and just bring into context the issue within chat. But that's something that we're going to be working on over time here.
Hi. So I have two questions, actually. One is, does this mean there's a different plan than the VS Code Copilot, which has its own premium request quota and things like that? And the second one is, can I just, rather than using this default Copilot agent, just build my own through all the amazing VS Code stuff that you have provided and deploy that one instead of using this one?
I'll take that, and then Tim can add if he has anything else. So on the first one about the sort of, I think it's called about the billing and the premium requests. So this is plugged into the exact same model as GitHub Copilot agent mode, and so it'll use the same sort of premium requests model as that. So today, I think every tool call that it's doing effectively is going to be one request against the model. And so you'll see that as part of your GitHub Pro Plus or Enterprise. This will use up those same premium requests as part of your allowance. And so you can use them either in agent mode or here in Copilot Coding Agent.
So to that, so we right now have individuals have their own premium request. Will this have its own, or is it like a pool of requests that it will just drop from?
This will use against the developer who assigned the issue, and so that person who is the co-author on that will will use their thing. So you can kind of use this in the examples Tim had where he was kind of working in VS Code and then assigning work off. You can think about both of those as sort of, kind of drawing down against the same model. So very integrated. We expect to continue to evolve that model, but these are really all part of a continuum, all something that you get access to natively as part of the Copilot offering.
One thing to add to that as well is that we kind of, when you use this, there are like two different ways that you pay. You pay for the Copilot usage, and you also pay for the GitHub Actions usage. And the really nice thing about the GitHub Actions usage being separate is that you can choose to use larger runners if you want to. So if your project requires more resources to like build and run tests and all those kind of things, you can choose to upgrade to a machine with more RAM or more CPU or more advanced networking so that you can have the requirements that you need.
And then the second question was about sort of, can you kind of build this yourself, right? So there's sort of two answers to that. One is, obviously, kind of what we showed today is a very integrated experience into GitHub, and we don't today have the ability for folks to build all of that themselves. So you can build, obviously, your own sort of coding agents today, and lots of folks are building really interesting and valuable coding agents that live in all sorts of places. Today, the challenge is oftentimes you build that coding agent, and then you have to get the code into GitHub, right? Because that's where the sort of code becomes meaningful as part of your project, is as part of a PR or as part of your main branch. And so we're trying to build a really integrated experience for this within GitHub today. I'd say one of the things we're looking at in the future is sort of taking a lot of those building blocks we've built to enable coding agent and bringing them into the platform so that you can build your own agents using those same building blocks. So reusing some of the actions infrastructure we've built for this, reusing some of that agentic identity we've built for this. And so over time, I think you'll see us build sort of richer integrations of your own into that. But today, a number of those pieces that we showed are specific to coding agent.
I just have one last comment to that. The reason why I asked you that is because my team has already built this, and it works. We have built peer programmers that works exactly like this in VS Code because of all the abilities and just the stuff that you guys have amazingly pushed out, which is amazing. Now, when I look at it, I just look at it like, okay, the same thing is being done on GitHub, right? But we have worked really hard to optimize it such that we're not even using the quota that's been given to us. We're cutting it down, bringing it down, the cost, stuff like that, right? So I would want to use my own agent because it will bring my costs down. That's the only reason I asked you that.
Yeah. No, I think we're really excited going forward to bring as much of this as possible into the platform, let as many other sort of folks building. GitHub has traditionally had a really open marketplace for applications, for actions, for all these things. We want to do the same thing for agents as sort of the next phase of this work. So definitely interested.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I work in a very large monolithic repository, more toward the million lines of code. But the reality of the situation is any given dev is only really working in this like 40,000 world. Do you see, or do you have some intuition that the way that I should be scoping that is with the instructions markdown file, or should I be like building MCPs that are like reflecting on my own code base, which I realize is basically what GitHub Copilot is doing, but maybe in my case, because the repo is so large, I should do that just to help them out.
I can give an answer for that. I mean, I think in general, we found that the kind of agentic search and plus the sort of code search that we do up front with GitHub Code Search can mean that Copilot, the coding agent, can zero in on where a change needs to be made pretty quickly, even without a lot of extra context that you're providing. Now, in a monorepo, it will always help for you to give it up front sort of some guidance on where the different pieces of the monorepo are and to help it sort of understand that right away so it doesn't have to figure it out. So any additional context you can give it is going to be helpful. But in general, we find it typically, if it is clear, like to a person working in this where it should be, then in general, it's going to find it. I'd say for an MCP server, if the content is all within the repository, it's unlikely you should have to have an MCP server for that. All that context is there, and it's more about telling it where it is. But of course, MCP servers, custom MCP servers are always useful just as a way to provide an additional sort of knowledge base that it can reference. So any kind of RAG source you might want to give it that's just a knowledge base about your repository or about how you work within your repository, you can sort of sit behind an MCP server and give to a coding agent, and it will take advantage of it.
Yeah, I've generally been surprised by how resourceful these agents are and like how good a job they do of just like looking around and searching to try to find the right places. You know, they look at the query, like find out what things to grep for, like what directories to look in. They do quite a good job of like narrowing down and finding the right place in my experience. Not always, sometimes there are misses, but generally I think it works pretty well. And a lot of that's because of the way that we've plugged in like GitHub code search and things like that to give it good context.
Thank you.
So wondering, is there an MCP server for Azure DevOps? Because we keep our user stories DevOps, but we use GitHub Copilot and GitHub.
I think there is not today, but that you may want to stay posted for the rest of the conference. So.
We have I work with another team for our company that does our own set of React components for branding and styling and whatnot. Any recommendations for how I could work with them and collaborate with them so that we could make sure that we could look at our Figma and look at their documentation so that it can actually use our components and stay on brand?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. So one, if they're working in your repository, then they can sort of collaborate with you on these issues and sort of review them as well. But I think maybe to your point around bringing those assets in from either Figma or from your own sort of component libraries, I think both of those are interesting. Figma has an MCP server of their own, right? I think today that's a desktop-based one, but I think we're talking to them about kind of potentially making that a server-side one as well. The idea that you could bring those Figma assets in and have Copilot be able to go reach out and leverage those and pull those in with a reference with an issue, that's something that absolutely kind of we'd want to be able to support. And then with that component library, that's another case where potentially that's an MCP server that you provide, or you just provide guidance for how to use that particular, maybe you have some documentation for that within your environment, and you give it access to that documentation so that it can pull it in and learn how to use those components. But absolutely, we would hope that you could sort of, through some of these configuration mechanisms, make that information available so that it can take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think it speaks to what Luke was saying earlier about, right now this is limited to a single repository. It looks at one repo, it opens a PR in one repo. Obviously, expanding that and supporting cross-repo use cases is going to be really important to increase the value and the work this can do. Probably the first step on that journey is like read-only access to other repos, being able to say, this is where my design system lives, like this is where my engineering documentation lives, those kind of things, and giving it the ability at least to search those workspaces to find more information. I think that will be really helpful for these kind of use cases so that most teams will have these special places in GitHub where relevant engineering stuff lives, and you want to give the agent access to those. Again, the same as an engineer has access, you want the agent to have that.
As far as early cost optimization, is there anywhere that you're pointing people in more descriptive tickets or trying to help the AI laser in on certain parts of the code?
Yeah, I think those are exactly it. The more specific you can be about what it needs to achieve, and the more you can set up its environment ahead of time for it to be able to be productive from step one, those are going to help it. I think a lot of the times where it takes a lot longer are where it needs to take the first 5 minutes just trying to get its environment set up, right? It's trying to install the right version of some dependency, or it's struggling to build because it didn't have the right version of Node, or it didn't have some libraries installed that it needed to, or didn't have access to some proxy server for accessing the packages. So all of these things are things that will just kind of waste some cycles for it every time. And so you can kind of look at what it's doing and say, oh, those first 5 steps, it didn't really need to do those. I could just tell it in Copilot instructions how to skip past that, or in my setup steps. So in general, I think you'll see pretty quickly once you start using it opportunities to sort of give it more information up front that'll help it to be more productive. I think then the more specific you are in what you want it to do, it will be able to just go check those things off and not have to kind of wander around and figure out how to solve the problem itself. But to the extent you don't know yet how to be more specific, it actually can be very creative in trying to solve a problem as well. So yeah.
Thank you.
I feel like I'm carrying on a theme here. Is there a way to get access to a private MCP server, or does that have to be on the internet? Or if we want to use a self-hosted agent for the runner, for example, in my company, we like to do as much as possible. We're in Azure, but we do things in a very controlled fashion. We may have JavaDoc or a Java repository that just simply wouldn't be allowed on the internet.
Yeah, so on the first question about a private MCP server, that is possible because like with the Copilot setup steps, you could sort of inject some secrets into the environment so that then you can go and download from a private NPM server, or a private PyPy server, or a private Docker image.
But
So-
would GitHub need a network path to that?
Yes, GitHub would need it. So I guess that gets the second question. But for the first question, technically you could have it be private, but it would have to be
On the
available through some authenticated package manager or Docker Hub or something like that.
Okay.
On the
But-
second question,
But that
for some-
would, just to make sure I'm absolutely clear, that has to be on the internet. We can't have that on a private.
yes, unless you wanted to do something like kind of VPN in from the Actions environment into your network. You could do that through anything you could do in your CI/CD environment through a sort of managed runner. You could do here. So there are ways you could accomplish it. But it sounds like in your particular environment, you're using self-hosted runners to sort of avoid this problem from the beginning and run this within your network. We don't today support self-hosted runners. I think directionally we certainly expect to. One of the reasons for choosing to build this on top of Actions was so that we could have that path in the future. But we don't have it today, so that would be a limitation.
Thank you.
All right. Is that it for questions? Sounds like it. All right, well, thank you very much for all the questions.
Thank you.
Have a good day.